Amber stared at her reflection in the mirror and sighed dramatically. "I'm going to get arrested," she muttered, "for committing a crime against fashion and basic dignity." Her lips were smeared with an unholy shade of brown lipstick applied like she was riding a roller coaster. Her cheeks were clown bright, her orange oversized glasses took up half her face, and her top knot looked like it had been spun by a blindfolded raccoon during a hurricane. "Pinterest would sue me for defamation," she added. Behind her, Emily was laughing so hard she almost dropped her eyeliner. "You look amazing," Emily said between giggles. "My mom would call it a cry for help." "Perfect. Remind me again why I'm doing this," Amber asked, arms crossed like a parent finding candy wrappers under a child's pillow. Emily gave her best fake innocent smile. "Because I'm in love with my boyfriend, and too much of a coward to tell my mother." "So you're going on this blind date with Blake Anderson, billionaire CEO extraordinaire, instead of me. You scare him off, and in return, you get a fancy meal and $90. Amber stared at her. "That's not a favor, that's emotional blackmail." "Same difference." Emily shrugged. "You said you needed the money." Amber paced the room like she was awaiting trial. "This is social suicide. If he doesn't flee the minute he sees me, I'll question his mental stability." Emily tossed her a pair of neon socks. "Oh, come on. Worst case, you get wine and cheesecake. Best case, you traumatize a CEO and he cancels all future blind dates. Win-win." Amber huffed. "If I die of embarrassment, please engrave on my tombstone." She just wanted free salmon. With a passion fruit explosion, Emily added wiping tears of laughter, and maybe a side of justice. Amber wasn't used to deception, but the bills weren't going to pay themselves. She was balancing culinary school, 3 part-time jobs, and caring for her mom, who was battling a stubborn illness with more grace than any human should be expected to muster. If playing decoy for one night could buy her another few days of groceries and her mom's medication, then so be it. She pulled on her thrift store puffy-sleeved dress that resembled a cursed curtain and adjusted her massive glasses one last time. "If this man has any sense," she mumbled, "he'll fake his own death before dessert." The taxi dropped her in front of an upscale Manhattan restaurant that screamed private hedge fund deals and awkward proposals. She stepped out the wind, catching her dress like she was a haunted kite. "God," she whispered, "let this man have allergies to eccentric women." The doorman hesitated, likely wondering if she'd taken a wrong turn from a Renaissance fair. "Name Helena Rivers," she said with a confidence she didn't feel. He nodded and led her inside past champagne flutes and patrons who had never seen rent-due notices. Blake Anderson sat alone in the corner, a dark suit so crisp it looked painful. He had the jawline of a Greek statue and an expression that suggested he could calculate stock prices in his sleep. When he stood, Amber's brain screamed, "Nope, too handsome. Abort mission." "Miss Helena," he asked, offering a hand. She shook it cautiously. "Unless you're selling encyclopedias, then I'm her twin sister." "Blake Anderson," he said smoothly. "I sell companies, not books. I sell desserts in jars," she replied, sitting down with the sound of plastic against leather. "So, we're both in sales." He looked at her, head tilted. "So, you're Ambassador Rivers' daughter?" Amber's brain stalled. Yes, but I was raised by very free-spirited nannies. One of them taught me pigeon whispering." "Long story." Blake smiled. "Intriguing." The waiter handed her a menu that read like a thesis. "Anything come in a jar?" she asked. "I recommend the salmon with passion fruit reduction," he said. "Reduction. I prefer passion fruit in its full chaotic glory," she quipped. Blake laughed, a real deep laugh that startled her. "I'll have the same," he told the waiter. Amber narrowed her eyes. "You like explosive fruit or women in psychedelic disaster dresses?" "Both, apparently." Determined to drive him away, Amber ramped up the absurdity. "Just so you know, I snore sleep talk and once had an existential crisis about ants." Blake didn't flinch. "Fascinating. I love eccentricity." "I'm too ugly for you," she tried. "You should date someone prettier." "I've dated pretty. I want someone honest and possibly unhinged." That shut her up. For someone she was supposed to scare away, he was interested. She squinted at him. "Are you into performance art or just deeply lonely?" "Neither," he replied calmly. "But I enjoy being surprised. She spent the evening telling outrageous lies. How she once wrestled a raccoon for a cupcake. How she used to train squirrels in interpretive dance. He not only listened, he responded with equally ridiculous stories. By the time dessert came, Amber realized with horror that she was actually having fun. Fun with the man she was supposed to drive away. "You're either deranged," she said, licking marshmallow off her spoon, "or terrifyingly open-minded." "I prefer rare gem," Blake responded. As the check arrived, Blake looked her dead in the eye. "3 more dates," he said. "You show up however you want. Try your hardest to drive me away. If you succeed, I'll give you $5 grand. If not, you tell me who you really are." Amber nearly choked on her water. Is this a psychological experiment or just an expensive kink? Neither. I'm curious. And bored. And you? He smiled in a way that made her stomach flip, "Are not what I expected." She shook his hand, pretending to be unfazed, though her fingers tingled. "Deal," she said, "but you've just signed up for a hurricane in a thrift store." He leaned in. "I can't wait." The next day, Amber sat in her cramped kitchen, spooning cereal into her mouth like it might contain answers, replaying every second of the date in her head. She had gone in dressed like a Pinterest fail with the mission to make Blake Anderson flee the scene like a man chased by bees, and instead he asked for more. 3 more dates, to be exact. She wasn't sure what was more disturbing, that he wanted to keep seeing her, or that a tiny, deeply traitorous part of her kind of wanted to see him too. "No," she muttered to her cereal. "We are not catching feelings for a billionaire. That's not in the budget." Still, a deal was a deal. And if she could win $5,000 just by being more unbearable than the day before, she'd have enough money to pay off 2 months of rent, her mom's next round of medication, and maybe even fix the toaster that had started giving off smoke signals. So she went full chaos. She dug through the darkest corners of the thrift store, pulled out a pink and purple striped jumpsuit that screamed circus escapee, paired it with bright yellow rain boots, 3 clashing beaded necklaces, and a straw hat decorated with plastic sunflowers, and a mysterious glittery raccoon pin. "Subtle," Emily said, nearly choking on her coffee. "You look like an Easter egg on LSD." "Perfect." Amber grinned, applying neon green eyeshadow with the intensity of a soldier prepping for battle. "If this doesn't make him run, nothing will." Emily tilted her head, concern replacing humor. "Are you sure you're still trying to win the bet? Because you're putting a little too much effort into not being wanted." Amber paused mid-mascara stroke. "Of course I'm trying to win. I mean, it's money. Practical. Logical. No feelings, no butterflies." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Uh-huh. And that dress totally screams practicality." The second date took place at a street food festival in Central Park. A chaotic blend of live jazz churros and way too many people bumping into each other with tacos in hand. Amber showed up looking like she had lost a bet with a kindergarten art class. Blake in jeans and a light blue button-down looked alarmingly normal. Normal in the way superheroes try to blend in but still end up looking like models lost on the way to a GQ shoot. When he spotted her, he grinned like he'd been waiting all day just to see that disaster of an outfit. "You look like a flamingo that discovered tie-dye," he said cheerfully. "European street fashion," Amber replied, hands on hips. "You clearly don't understand high art." They wandered between food stalls, Amber offering commentary like a slightly unhinged food critic. "These hot dogs have abandonment issues," she said, pointing solemnly. "You can tell by the bun's droop." Blake played along effortlessly. And those churros, definitely hiding deep insecurities under all that sugar. It's called emotional layering." Amber nodded. She was firing on all cylinders, spouting nonsense, dancing badly in public, overanalyzing duck behavior by the lake, but Blake just laughed. Real snort-through-your-nose laughs. And worse, he started making her laugh too. Which was cheating. Definitely cheating. At one point, as they sat on a bench sharing crepes, Blake said, "You know, I actually like this version of you. It's ridiculous, unpredictable, and honestly kind of genius." Amber blinked. "I'm trying to be unbearable." "You're failing spectacularly," he replied. "But in your defense, it's the most entertaining failure I've ever seen." She glared at him over her crepe. You're weird. Takes one to know one. He grinned. And for a terrifying second, Amber forgot she was pretending, forgot the costumes, the bet, the rules. She was just a girl eating dessert with a guy who saw right through her. And she didn't hate it. Okay, she said, after a long pause. Be honest. Why are you really doing this? Why keep going on dates with me when I'm clearly trying to repel you? Blake looked at her seriously. Because you don't want anything from me. Most people, especially women, see dollar signs and act like they've been auditioning for The Bachelor their whole lives. But you walk into a restaurant dressed like abstract chaos and tell stories about ant colonies and whispering to pigeons. You're not trying to impress me. And that's the most refreshing thing I've experienced in years. Amber stared at him, suddenly unsure of where the act ended and where the real her began. They ended the evening dancing awkwardly near a fountain, swaying to a jazz band's offbeat rhythm. You dance like a malfunctioning windmill, Amber teased. And you dance like a drunk flamingo, Blake countered. Perfect pair, she said, and it was ridiculous, the whole scene. Two mismatched humans moving badly in public, making duck jokes, eating food from paper plates, and somehow it felt more real than any date Amber had ever had. Maybe because there were no masks left to wear. Or maybe because this was the first time someone was choosing her not despite the weird, but because of it. As they walked back toward the exit, Blake turned to her with that maddening, unreadable smile. So, third date. You choose. Anywhere, anytime. Just promise it's soon. Amber raised an eyebrow. Why the rush? Because I'm enjoying this, he said simply. And because I want to see what level of chaos you bring next. Her heart skipped a beat. I'll think about it, she replied, trying to sound neutral. But if I show up in full clown makeup next time, you better not flinch. Looking forward to it, he said, not joking at all. That night, back in her apartment, Amber peeled off the rainbow outfit, wiped the glitter off her cheeks, and stared at herself in the mirror. She looked like herself. A girl who worked too hard, loved too deeply, and never really expected to be seen. But Blake had seen her through every layer of ridiculousness. And that terrified her more than any disguise ever could. Because somehow, in the middle of a fake date in fake clothes under very real lights, something real had started to grow. And if she wasn't careful, she wasn't just going to lose the bet. She was going to lose her heart. Amber chose a tiny cafe tucked into a side street in Greenwich Village for their third date, a place so cozy it felt like it had been built inside a storybook. The wooden floors creaked in the most charming way, and potted plants hung from the ceiling like the place had grown its own jungle of good vibes. She showed up 10 minutes early, wearing an orange vintage dress with blue polka dots, striped socks, and mismatched shoes, a red flat on the left and a green sandal on the right. When the barista raised an eyebrow, she just smiled and said, "It's my way of staying emotionally unbalanced." Blake arrived right on time, somehow managing to look both impossibly sharp and like he hadn't tried at all. White shirt, navy blazer, a calm confidence that made other people sit straighter just by being near him. When he spotted Amber, his smile bloomed instantly. "You managed to look even more colorful," he said, pressing a playful kiss to her hand, like they were in a Jane Austen remake gone rogue. "You look like a Picasso painting come to life." "Please," Amber replied, tossing her hair, Picasso painted squares. "I prefer to think of myself as a tipsy Monet." They ordered pineapple for him, banana cream for her, and 2 cups of coffee strong enough to awaken sleeping dragons. The first few minutes were light, filled with sarcastic takes on modern art, exaggerated stories about their imaginary past lives, and a detailed debate on whether ducks or raccoons would win in a street fight. Amber was halfway through explaining her hypothetical raccoon fight club when she noticed a woman walking toward their table. Tall, blonde, elegant in a designer way that said, "My moisturizer costs more than your rent." And worst of all, familiar. Blake, the woman said, her voice smooth as silk and twice as sharp. What a surprise. Amber stiffened. The way she said his name made it sound like a warning. Blake's posture changed subtly, like someone bracing for a storm. "Victoria," he said, standing politely. "Amber, this is Victoria Ashworth." "Victoria Amber." Victoria offered her hand to Amber, who shook it warily. So, Victoria said with a smile that was one shade too close to a smirk, you're the artist everyone's been talking about. Amber's brain short-circuited. Artist? Oh, I'm more of a public disturbance, she said, trying to stay light. Performance chaos. Very on brand. How long have you two known each other? Victoria asked, her tone dripping with mock curiosity. A few days, Blake answered smoothly before Amber could open her mouth. A few days, Victoria repeated like she was tasting something unpleasant. Well, Blake has always had peculiar tastes. I remember when he went through that phase of collecting street art. It lasted about a month. Amber forced a laugh, but something in her chest tightened. And you? She asked, tilting her head. What kind of art do you like? Real art, Victoria replied, eyes glinting. Pieces with actual value, not youthful experiments by people who sell candy on the sidewalk. The world tilted. Amber's smile froze. Blake's jaw tensed. And Victoria? She sipped her latte like she'd just fired the opening shot in a war. Excuse me, Amber said, voice steady but cold. Oh, I thought you knew. Victoria shrugged. New York circles may look big, but word travels fast when someone different shows up. Blake started to say something, but Amber cut in. You mean poor. You meant different, but what you really meant was poor. Victoria blinked, but her smile didn't waver. I just meant unexpected. That's all. Well, Amber said, pushing her plate away. Appetite gone, at least my job helps people. I sell joy in jars, and sometimes sugar-covered hope. That has value too. How noble, Victoria replied, then turned her gaze to Blake. This disguise thing, very theatrical, though I suppose it's not sustainable. Amber sat in stunned silence, realizing Victoria knew about the disguises the whole act. But how? She looked at Blake. He hadn't moved. Had he told her, or had Victoria dug it up herself? Either way, Amber felt exposed, like someone had ripped off every layer she'd carefully built. Did you know she was going to be here? Amber asked once Victoria walked away in a cloud of expensive perfume and disdain. Blake shook his head. No, I swear. Then how does she know about me, about my job? The costumes? He exhaled. Victoria has ways. She's thorough. Amber's hands curled into fists. Did you look into me too? Blake paused, then said quietly, I did. Amber's breath caught. So this was all a game to you? No, he said quickly. Not a game. I was curious. I needed to understand the person who what Amber snapped, who sold candy in the park, who wore silly outfits and told jokes about raccoons. Were you planning to write a thesis on me, Blake? He looked genuinely upset. I was trying to protect something I didn't understand yet. You were trying to control it, she corrected. You saw something you didn't expect and decided to manage it like a business risk. She grabbed her bag and stood up. I'm not a risk. I'm a person, Amber. No, she said, eyes bright. I agreed to play a part. I didn't sign up to be dissected. Good night, Mr. Anderson. Outside, the New York air bit at her skin, but it wasn't the cold that made her shiver. It was the realization that maybe, just maybe, she had started to fall for him for real. And now she couldn't tell where the mask ended and her heart began. She didn't look back. Not when she heard the cafe door open. Not when Blake called her name. She kept walking. Because sometimes, even when something feels like magic, you have to step away before it turns into something that breaks you. Amber didn't sleep much that night. Her brain was on a loop. Victoria's smug face, Blake's calm confession, and her own dramatic exit, which, let's be honest, was halfway between a mic drop and a minor panic attack. She woke up to her phone buzzing on the nightstand with a text from an unknown number. I'm sorry. I messed up. I didn't mean to hurt you. She stared at it for 5 minutes before muttering, too little, too late, billionaire. But then she didn't delete the message. She just let it sit there glowing like a question she wasn't ready to answer. Over the next few days, Amber went into full hide-from-the-world mode. She skipped the park, took alternate routes to school, even wore a baseball cap that said, Nope, in bold letters when selling sweets downtown. She told herself she didn't care if Blake showed up again, didn't want him to. But every time she heard polished shoes on pavement or caught a whiff of expensive cologne, her heart did that ridiculous thing where it fluttered and tripped over itself like a high school crush. And she hated it, mostly because it meant she hadn't been acting at all. Then on Thursday morning, she found the envelope. It was thick, elegant, and wedged under her apartment door, like it had been delivered with both intention and regret. Inside was a black and gold invitation to a high-profile charity auction at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Tucked beside it was a handwritten note in strong, familiar script. Amber, I know you have every reason to hate me, but this event supports free medical care for low-income families. If you want to go, great. If not, I understand. Either way, I'll be there. On the back, he'd added, P.S. No costume required, unless you really want to. For 10 full minutes, Amber just sat at the kitchen table, staring at the card like it might self-destruct. The word charity tugged at her. She thought of her mom, who had skipped another doctor's appointment that week because they couldn't afford it. This auction could mean help for her, for others. Still, she was hesitant. What if he thinks I'm coming for him, she muttered. What if I am? She hated that her stomach fluttered at the thought of seeing Blake again, hated even more that a part of her missed their absurd, beautiful chaos. Enter Emily with 3 dresses on hangers and a giant iced coffee. You're going, she said, barging in like a fabulous hurricane, and you're going to look like yourself. Not a scarecrow, not a flamingo, just Amber, the real version, the one people actually fall for. That version's boring, Amber muttered, eyeing the dresses. That version's beautiful, Emily corrected, holding up a navy blue gown with a soft vintage neckline. And if he doesn't see that, we'll burn his tux. That night the Met looked like something out of a movie. Soft golden lighting bounced off priceless art string music, floated through the air like champagne bubbles, and every single person in the room looked like they had their own Wikipedia page. Amber walked in slowly, hands trembling, slightly dressed, not as a character but as herself. No crazy colors, no glittery raccoons, just simple elegance and the confidence she was trying hard to fake. She wandered through the exhibit, half admiring the art, half practicing snappy comebacks in case Victoria showed up again breathing Chanel and malice. You came, Blake's voice said behind her, and Amber turned. He was in a classic black tux, hair slightly tousled, and somehow looked exactly like someone who belonged in this world, and yet like he didn't care about it. I came for the cause, she replied, trying to sound nonchalant. Not for you. Understood, he said with a soft smile. But you look beautiful anyway. Amber rolled her eyes, but the heat rising to her cheeks betrayed her. Don't get all smooth on me, Mr. Anderson. I'm still mad. Fair, he said, holding out an arm. Want to look at some overpriced art and judge it with me, only if I'm allowed to call something visually insulting, she said, linking arms with him. They walked past abstract paintings, laughing quietly at absurd titles like Untitled Number 74. Must have been a wild 73 pieces before this, Amber commented. But somewhere between the humor and awkward glances, the tension began to thaw. Blake paused in front of a colorful, chaotic piece and said, This one reminds me of you. Amber frowned. Because it's loud and confusing. Because it makes people stop. Look closer. And realize there's more to it than they thought, he said. Looking at her, not the painting. Amber suddenly forgot how to breathe. They ended up in a corner with 2 glasses of champagne and one huge question between them. Why did you make the bet? She asked. What was the real reason? Blake took a deep breath. Because you surprised me. Because you were the first person who didn't want anything from me. I needed that. I needed to believe someone saw me, not the CEO, not the money, just me. Amber looked down at her glass. And what do you see now? He didn't answer right away. Then someone who makes me want to be better, braver, more real. Amber wanted to say something witty or brave or at least not awkward, but all she could manage was, I'm scared. Blake stepped closer. Me too, but I'd rather be scared with you than comfortable with anyone else. For a long moment they stood in silence, the rest of the world fading into the sound of music and murmured conversation. Finally, she smiled. You know this doesn't mean I forgive you yet. I know, he said. but it means I still have a chance. Amber raised her glass. One chance, she warned. And you'd better not waste it. Wouldn't dream of it, Blake replied, and for the first time in days, she believed him. The morning after the charity event, Amber woke up with a headache that wasn't from champagne, it was from possibility. Her phone buzzed non-stop messages from Helena, from her mom, even a sweet text from Blake that read simply, "Thank you for coming. You were stunning." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because her heart was caught between the truth and the lie, between what had started as a disguise and what had somehow morphed into something terrifyingly real. And as she lay there staring at the ceiling, a thought snuck in that she didn't want to admit out loud. What if I want this? But life didn't pause for emotional crises. At 6 a.m., her phone rang again. This time it was her mother. "Honey, the pain's back," Diane said softly, trying not to sound scared. Amber sat straight up in bed, her stomach twisting. "Okay, I'm coming to get you." Within the hour, she was on the subway to Queens, a to-go cup of black coffee in one hand, panic barely contained in the other. The doctor visit was long, grueling, filled with waiting rooms that smelled like antiseptic and sadness. After several hours, they finally got an answer, and it wasn't good. "We need additional tests," the doctor said, his voice gentle but firm. "Unfortunately, they aren't covered under the basic plan." Amber braced herself. "How much?" "Around $800, he replied. "We can try to refer her through the public system, but the wait would be several weeks." Amber looked at her mom, who tried to smile through the pain. "We'll pay," she said, even though $800 might as well have been $800,000. She had less than $150 in her account, and rent was due in 9 days. But none of that mattered. "We'll find a way." She dropped her mom off and headed straight to Washington Square Park, dragging her tired body but determined heart. She unpacked her candy jars, set up her folding table, and forced a smile for every passerby. Her brigadeiros and coconut balls were as good as ever, but her spirit was heavy. Still, she hustled. She smiled. She sold. She told jokes to toddlers and charmed tourists, and did everything she could to pretend the world wasn't caving in around her. By 4 p.m., she had made almost $200. Not bad, but still nowhere near enough. That's when she noticed the camera, a sleek DSLR held by a woman in designer sunglasses who stood about 20 feet away, snapping photos like Amber was a sideshow attraction. When Amber made eye contact, the woman quickly turned and disappeared into the crowd. Something felt off, too calculated. And a minute later, she knew why. Blake appeared. Jeans, white t-shirt, hands in his pockets, looking painfully out of place, yet somehow exactly where he belonged. Amber's pulse jumped. "You stalking me now?" she said without looking up. "If I was, I'd bring coffee," he replied, holding out a latte. "Hazelnut. 2 sugars." She took the cup without saying thank you, too tired to argue. "What do you want?" "To help," Blake said. "And to warn you." He showed her his phone. On the screen was a photo of her selling candy taken just minutes ago, now posted online with the headline, "From Candy Cart to CEO's Heart." The caption was cruel, condescending, gossip-laced poison. Amber's stomach dropped. "Victoria," she said, the name landing like a curse. "She sent this to every socialite in Manhattan," Blake confirmed. "She's trying to humiliate you." "And me. She's succeeding," Amber muttered. "Look at me. I'm a PR nightmare in sneakers." "No," Blake said, voice steady. "You're real, and she's scared of that." But Amber wasn't listening. She was already packing up her jars, stuffing them into bags with shaking hands. "I told you from the start people like me don't belong in your world. And this is what happens when we try." "Amber, stop." She didn't. "You think you're being kind, but you're not. You're dragging me into something that will eat me alive." "Is your mom okay?" Blake asked, suddenly cutting through the spiral. Amber froze. "What?" "Your mom," he said gently. "You look like someone carrying too many worries at once." "I've been there." Amber blinked. "You, Mr. Private Jet." My family didn't always have money, Blake said. I built everything I have because I know what it's like to feel powerless. I know what it's like to choose between medication and groceries. Amber's walls cracked. She looked at him and for the first time saw something deeper than suits and smiles. She saw truth. She needs tests, Amber said finally, voice soft. $800 I don't have. Blake pulled out his wallet, but she stepped back. No, I don't want charity. It's not charity, he said. It's a loan. Or call it prepayment for 6 months of sweets. Whatever makes you feel better. But let me help. Amber hesitated. She hated needing anyone, but she hated feeling helpless even more. After a long pause, she nodded. Fine. A loan. With interest. Blake smiled. Fine. But I'm charging you hugs as P gross, she said, but smiled back. As she zipped up her last container, Blake touched her arm. There's something else, he said. Something I've been meaning to tell you. She turned. What I knew who you were the first night, he said quietly. Not because I looked into you. Because I'd seen you before. In the park. Giving a free candy to a little girl who couldn't afford it. Making her laugh. Making strangers happy. I saw you. I never forgot. Amber's breath hitched. Why didn't you say anything? Because I didn't want to interrupt something beautiful. And for the first time, Amber didn't feel like someone pretending to be enough. She felt seen, and that was everything. 3 days passed in a haze of quiet phone calls, hospital visits, and a growing ache in Amber's chest that no amount of sugar could sweeten. She hadn't seen Blake since their conversation in the park, but the envelope he left at her door stayed on her desk, unopened, like a question she hadn't answered yet. Then late Friday night, she came home to find him waiting outside her apartment building, leaning casually against the railing, holding 2 steaming paper bags. Indian or Thai, he asked, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Because I brought both, and I'm fully prepared to eat whatever you don't want. Amber stood still for a second, grocery bag in hand, heart thudding harder than it had any right to. You stalk all your almost girlfriends with takeout, she asked, trying to sound annoyed but failing miserably. Only the ones who look like they haven't eaten a real meal in 3 days, he replied gently. Come on, you look like you could use food or a hug, or both. Something in his voice made her exhale long and slow. She unlocked the door, waved him in and said, Hope you brought extra naan. Inside they sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by the scent of curry and the hum of a city that never quite slept. Amber picked at her food, but Blake ate like someone who hadn't had a quiet dinner in years, like someone grateful for every small thing. I miss this, he said between bites. The chaos. The color. You. Amber looked at him. I'm still mad, you know. I know, he nodded. But I'm not here to fix it. I'm here to be in it. With you. Mess and all. After dinner, they drifted to the couch, plates forgotten. Blake took off his shoes, leaned back, and let out a contented sigh that made Amber chuckle. You're surprisingly chill for a guy who runs an empire. That's because you're surprisingly grounding for a girl who sells candy in jars, he said without missing a beat. You make the world feel slower, less sharp, like maybe I don't have to be 10 steps ahead all the time. She stared at him. He meant it. Every word. It was terrifying how easy it was to fall for someone when they looked at you like you were the piece they never knew they needed. I have a proposal, Blake said, suddenly sitting up. And no, not the diamond ring kind unless you're into dramatic plot twists. Amber raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Come with me to Charleston next weekend, he said. Just for a few days. My grandmother's having a milestone birthday and the whole family's gathering at her estate. She's been asking questions, lots of them. And I told her I'm seeing someone real. Amber blinked. You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend in front of your entire billionaire family? Yes, he said. And also, no, I want you to be my girlfriend. For real. And I need your help convincing my family to see what I already do. Amber put down her tea, suddenly hyper-aware of everything. Let me guess, you'll pay me. Blake hesitated. I wasn't going to, but if you want it to be transactional, I'll write the check. But that's not why I asked. I asked because I want you there. Because my grandmother is sharp and curious, and about the only person in that house who understands value beyond bank accounts. And because I think she'll love you." "What if I mess it up?" Amber whispered. "What if I say the wrong thing or wear the wrong dress or spill soup on your uncle's $5,000 pants?" "Then it'll be the best family gathering we've ever had," he said softly. She should have said no. She should have laughed in his face and reminded him that she didn't belong in mansions or boardrooms or family portraits next to legacy wealth. But instead, she found herself asking, "How long would I have to pretend?" Blake looked at her, then really looked. "I don't want you to pretend at all. I want them to see you, all of you. And if it makes it easier, we can call it a temporary arrangement. A week. 1 week. And if it gets weird, I'll have a helicopter on standby to get you out." Amber snorted. "Of course you would." That night, after he left, Amber lay awake, staring at her ceiling. Fingers tangled in her sheets, heart tangled in him. He had made her laugh. He had fed her. He had asked, not demanded, for her presence in the most intimidating place imaginable. And he had done it not with arrogance, but with vulnerability. That was what wrecked her most. Not the offer, not the romance, but the honesty. The man who could buy anything asking for the one thing he couldn't force her willingness. By morning, the decision was made. She found Blake waiting on the bench outside her apartment, again, coffee in hand, like some persistent but charming ghost. So he asked, eyes hopeful. Amber took a deep breath, looked at the sunrise over the brick buildings and said, "Fine, I'll come, but I'm not going to be anyone but me. And if your grandmother hates me, I get to take home whatever silverware I accidentally steal." Blake grinned. "Deal. But fair warning, Grandma Eleanor has excellent taste in people and horrible taste in forks." As they walked down the street together, shoulder to shoulder, something shifted. It wasn't just a pact between two people from different worlds. It was the start of something real. Amber didn't know if she was stepping into disaster or destiny, but when Blake's hand brushed hers, and he didn't pull away, she decided not to either. For the first time, she wasn't just playing a role. She was writing a new one with him. The Anderson estate in Charleston wasn't a house, it was a small kingdom. Nestled behind wrought iron gates and lined with oak trees draped in Spanish moss, it looked like something out of a southern fairy tale. Amber sat in the back seat of Blake's town car, her palms sweating against the fabric of her navy blue jumpsuit. It was elegant but simple, just like she hoped to be. "Still time to fake a fever," she murmured. Blake chuckled beside her, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "Relax. It's just my terrifying, judgmental family. You'll be great." The front door opened before they even reached the steps. A butler greeted them. Yes, a real butler named Charles, with a British accent and everything, and ushered them into a grand foyer with ceilings taller than her apartment building. A crystal chandelier hung like it had its own mortgage. Amber blinked. "Do people actually live here, or is this a set for a Netflix drama?" Blake leaned in. "It's mostly real. The drama, too." Then came the parade cousins, aunts, half-brothers, and uncles with identical chins. They all stared, smiled politely, and judged in complete silence. But then at the top of the staircase she appeared. Eleanor Anderson. Tall, elegant silver hair swept back and eyes sharper than any Wall Street executive. She descended like royalty cane in hand, but grace in every step. So she said, appraising Amber without blinking, "You're the girl who got my grandson to stop working past midnight." Amber swallowed. "Depends. If that's a compliment, then yes." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, then smiled. "I like her already." And just like that, the tension snapped, not entirely, but enough for Amber to breathe. Dinner that night was a 5-course performance served under twinkling chandeliers and awkward silences. Amber tried to remember which fork was which while fielding passive-aggressive questions from Blake's cousin Marcus. "So, what exactly do you do, Amber?" he asked, his tone lined with condescension and a touch of disbelief. "I sell joy," she replied, slicing her salmon with a surprising amount of confidence. "In jars, sometimes with coconut, always with love." Marcus blinked. "Ah. Cute." Amber smiled sweetly. "It funds medical bills and dreams." "What do you sell?" Blake coughed to cover a laugh. Eleanor raised her wine glass. After dinner, they moved to the veranda. The night air was warm, laced with jasmine and the soft chirp of crickets. Amber stood at the railing, looking out across the moonlit garden, trying to process how far she'd come from candy carts and city sidewalks. Overwhelmed, Blake asked softly, joining her side. "A little," she admitted. "But I haven't broken anything yet, so I'd say we're ahead of schedule." He took her hand, their fingers fitting like puzzle pieces. "You were amazing tonight. Grandma already wants to kidnap you." Amber turned to him, her face lit only by the soft glow from inside. "What about you?" she asked. "Is this still just part of the act?" Blake didn't flinch. "I haven't been acting since the second date, maybe not even the first." He paused, then added, "You walked into my world wearing polka dots and chaos, and somehow everything made sense for the first time in years." Amber's heart pounded. "You know this isn't forever, right? I still live in a studio with a toaster that sparks when it's mad." "I know," he said. "And I'd trade every chandelier in this place for 10 more mornings with you in that toaster." The next morning, Amber woke to the smell of fresh pastries and the sound of laughter downstairs. She tiptoed down the hallway in borrowed slippers, only to find Eleanor in the sunroom sipping tea and reading the newspaper while pretending to. "Sit," Eleanor said without looking up. "Let's talk." Amber obeyed. "Am I in trouble?" Eleanor set down her cup. "No, but I need to know something. Do you love him?" Amber blinked. I don't know. It's all happening so fast." Eleanor smiled gently. "That's the thing about people like Blake. They're used to fast, but love loves about staying." That evening, Blake and Amber took a walk through the estate gardens. Fireflies danced around them, casting flickers of gold between the hedges. Amber stopped by a stone bench beneath an old magnolia tree. "You ever think this is too much?" she asked. "Too different? Too doomed?" Blake sat beside her. "I used to," he admitted. "But then I met someone who made me believe different could be beautiful, and chaos could be home." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Not a ring, but a tiny silver candy jar charm. "For your bracelet," he said. "The one you wear when you think no one's looking." Amber stared at the charm, her eyes stinging. "How did you know?" "Because I watch you," he said. "I notice things. The way you always fix the sugar lids at cafes. The way you hum when you're nervous. The way you light up when a kid smiles." Amber leaned her head on his shoulder. "You're making it very hard to not fall for you, Anderson." "That's the idea," he whispered. As the stars blinked overhead and the world quieted around them, Amber closed her eyes and let herself lean into the warmth, the madness, the terrifying possibility of love that didn't come in jars or with warning labels. For the first time, she wasn't pretending, and neither was he. Sunday morning arrived, dressed in gold and softness. The sunlight streamed through the wide plantation windows of the Anderson estate, dappling the hardwood floors in honey. Amber sat at the breakfast table in a cotton robe Eleanor had lent her, sipping orange juice and trying to pretend her heart wasn't quietly unraveling. Across the room, Blake stood with his grandmother, heads tilted together over an old photo album, both smiling at memories she didn't belong to. Yet. And somehow that little word yet felt heavier than a promise. "We were just looking at his baby pictures," Eleanor said, beckoning Amber over. "Come here. You should see what this troublemaker looked like in a diaper." Blake groaned. "This is abuse." Amber leaned in anyway, eyes scanning black and white images of a pudgy-cheeked toddler with unruly curls and the same determined eyes. "You looked like you were plotting world domination," she teased. He was Eleanor deadpanned. He tried to fire the gardener when he was 4. Amber laughed, but part of her ached this quiet intimacy, this glimpse of a life so far from hers. It was beautiful and dangerous. Later that afternoon, Amber found herself helping Eleanor in the greenhouse behind the estate. They pruned orchids and swapped stories. Amber about her mom, about late nights baking under flickering lights. Eleanor about her late husband and the art of surviving wealth without letting it devour you. "You have roots," Eleanor said, wiping her hands on a towel. "People like Blake. They need someone who reminds them where the ground is." Amber blinked. "I'm just me." Eleanor met her gaze. "Exactly. And that's exactly what makes you unforgettable. That night, the family hosted a garden dinner under a canopy of fairy lights and southern stars. Long tables were filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and far too many courses. Amber wore a soft olive dress Eleanor had insisted she borrow, and Blake hadn't taken his eyes off her all evening. "You're glowing," he whispered as they danced on the patio, her hand in his, the jazz band weaving magic around them. "It's the humidity," she said, "and the carbs." "It's you," he replied simply. And she had no answer to that, only the fluttering in her chest that made her forget the world. Around dessert, Eleanor stood and tapped her glass with a silver fork. "I'd like to make a toast," she said. The table quieted. "This weekend has reminded me of something I almost forgot, that love isn't always found where we expect. It's messy, inconvenient, and often disguised as chaos." Her eyes lingered on Blake and Amber. "But it's also the most important legacy we leave behind." She raised her glass. "To the brave ones, the real ones." Amber swallowed hard as glasses clinked and a hush of warmth settled over her shoulders like a blanket. After the toast, as guests dispersed into smaller circles and soft conversations, Amber slipped away to the edge of the garden. She needed air, space, perspective. Blake followed a minute later barefoot on the grass jacket slung over one shoulder. "You disappeared on me," he said softly. "You overwhelmed me," she replied, not unkindly. "All of this did." He came closer, careful. "Tell me what's going on in that beautiful, overthinking brain of yours." She looked at him. "I don't fit here. I'm trying, but I'm still the girl who sells hope in jars and calls it a business. You're also the girl who walked into my life and made everything stop spinning so fast," Blake said. "You're not trying to fit in. You're changing what belongs." Amber stared at him, the honesty of his words hitting like sunrise after a storm. "This isn't pretend for me anymore," she whispered. "It stopped being pretend a long time ago." "I know," Blake said. "Same here." And in that quiet patch of moonlit lawn with cicadas humming and champagne fizzing and forgotten glasses behind them, they kissed not with urgency, but with certainty. That kiss was everything a kiss should be, soft searching a promise and a question wrapped in one breath. When they pulled away, neither of them said anything right away. They didn't need to. It was all there in the silence between them, in the way Blake's forehead rested against hers, and her fingers curled into his shirt like she was afraid to let go. The world felt distant and safe. For once, there was no audience, no disguise, no story to perform. Just two people standing in the middle of something terrifyingly real. Later, back in her guest room, Amber stared at the ceiling and whispered to the dark. What if this is the beginning of everything? Because it felt like it. It felt like every broken thing in her life had somehow led her here, not to a mansion or a man with a private jet, but to a moment where she finally believed she was enough, not despite the chaos, but because of it. And that she realized was the truest kind of love, the kind that saw the messy, beautiful, ordinary truth of you and stayed anyway. Down the hall, Blake sat by the window of his childhood room, staring at the night sky with a smile he didn't try to hide. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was chasing the future or running from the past. He was exactly where he wanted to be with the one person who made all of it feel real. Tomorrow would bring questions, challenges, maybe even heartbreak. But tonight was a pause, a breath, and in that breath something extraordinary was beginning. Dressed in the navy suit she'd borrowed from Blake, borrowed but tailored just for her, Amber stood in the grand lobby of the Anderson Corporation's glass tower, heart beating in sync with the click of her heels on marble floors. Every step toward the conference room felt like walking onto a stage she had no lines for. Marcus and the board members were waiting at the long table, their expressions politely curious with a hint of European disdain. Blake's fingers brushed her hand as they passed him, and the gentle squeeze anchored her. She straightened her shoulders and stepped inside. Marcus rose to greet them with a stiff cream-colored smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, Mr. Anderson and Ms. Martinez," he said, voice syrupy and cool. "Come, please sit." Amber scanned the room, half a dozen men and women in expensive suits, each with notepads and pens ready, waiting for her to slip. The CEO's office had prepared them for a marketing pitch, not an impromptu embodying of family and authenticity. "Thank you," Blake said calmly. "Amber has something to share with you." Marcus raised an eyebrow. Blake started, "Amber represents everything I think this company, our family, needs more of. Grit, resilience, authenticity." A ripple went through the room. She runs her own small business, supports her family, and cares about people most of all. Amber took a breath, heart pounding. "I'm not here because of my background," she began, voice steady. "I'm here because I want to help this family see that value isn't measured in net worth, but in tenacity, kindness, and real-world impact." A pause. Then Marcus coughed. "Interesting rhetoric," Marcus said, tone glacial. "But this is business. We evaluate CEOs, not candy jar saleswomen." Amber swallowed and held his gaze. "I sold sweets not because it was easy, but because it gave me enough to pay for my mom's medicine. It taught me empathy, perseverance, humility, qualities that turn profits into legacies." The table fell silent. "Legacies," she echoed softly. Blake met her eyes from across the room, nodding supportively. Patricia, Marcus's wife, and a board observer leaned forward. "But do you understand the stakes involved? Shareholder expectations, global markets, fiduciary responsibilities." Her tone wasn't harsh, but not warm. "I do," Amber said, "because I've balanced bills for years. Those struggles taught me to respect every dollar and every person. When you invest in people, they invest their best selves back." Another ripple. Blake leaned in. "That's exactly what I saw in her." Uncle Thomas, the conservative voice of the family, folded his arms. "This is unprecedented. We've never considered a non-family member or someone without an elite pedigree for any role." Amber looked around. "That's exactly why I'm here. Because diversity in background creates diversity in ideas. Because connection to ordinary people builds brand loyalty. Because if your PR takes a hit like last week, it's real communities that affirm your roadmap." She paused. "I may not have a legacy last name, but I have a legacy of working hard and healing people. Stories matter." A murmur ran through the room. Eleanor cleared her throat from the seat beside Blake Kane, tapping softly. "I couldn't agree more," she said, voice steady, regal. "When this family had nothing, it was relationships and integrity that carried us, not balance sheets, not titles. I trust Blake's judgment." The others waited, as she added, "because I've watched Amber inspire him not with fancy suits, but with strength and grace." Marcus's lips trembled. His sister-in-law had spoken. The tide shifted. Blake stood crisp and sincere. "I love this person not despite who she is, but because of who she is." His voice trembled with emotion. "And I believe she could help lead this company not from the corner office, but from aligning us with our purpose, supporting real people." Amber's gaze wandered to his. His belief in her lit her chest on fire. "Would you be willing," he asked the board, "to give her a chance, a role to help shape corporate social impact?" Silence fell. The board chair, a woman named Lorraine, cleared her throat. "This is highly irregular," she said. "But perhaps this family, this legacy needs a new path." She looked at Marcus. "Are you willing to risk?" Marcus hesitated, then sighed, looking at Amber. "For Blake," he said quietly, "and for the company, yes. I'll support it." Gasps, whispers. Lorraine nodded. "Then I propose we launch a pilot initiative. Amber Martinez as Director of Community Engagement, 6-month trial. Vote, hands raised." One by one they voted in favor, hesitant but hopeful. Relief flooded through Amber. Blake exhaled, pulling her into a quick embrace that startled the room. Eleanor clapped softly. Marcus nodded at Lorena. The company founding members were leaning forward in curiosity rather than judgment. In that moment, Amber realized she hadn't just earned a title, she'd earned legitimacy respect. She'd bridged 2 worlds. And Blake. He was right beside her, hand on her back. As they left the room, she whispered, "We did it." He kissed her temple. "We did." The day of the wedding arrived like a scene out of a southern dream. Blue skies painted wide, warm air curling through the moss-draped trees of Charleston, and the Anderson estate transformed into a place where 2 worlds would finally meet. Amber stood in front of the mirror, her dress simple but elegant, soft lace hugging her waist like it had been waiting for her all her life. Her hair was twisted loosely at her nape, a single pearl pinned near her ear. Eleanor's. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from the staggering weight of everything. This moment meant a poor girl with a candy cart was about to marry a man who could buy a private island, and yet it had never been about the money. Downstairs, the garden had filled with people, Blake's extended family in tailored suits, Amber's mom in a blue dress she'd bought secondhand and worn like royalty. Emily, wiping her eyes before the ceremony even started. The flowers were wild, mismatched, just like Amber had wanted sunflowers next to peonies, soft baby's breath tucked into mason jars. It wasn't grand. It was them. Blake stood at the altar, hands clasped tight, his tie slightly askew, his eyes scanning the aisle like nothing else in the world mattered except the woman walking down it. And when Amber did, when she finally stepped out into the aisle, the entire crowd blurred. She saw only him, not the empire, not the legacy, just Blake. His eyes widened, his mouth parted slightly like he couldn't believe she was real. She walked past people who had doubted her, whispered about her, called her an accident in a designer world, and yet every step felt like defiance in heels. She was his choice. He was hers. And every heartbeat between them led straight to this. The vows were whispered promises woven with laughter and trembling honesty. Amber swore to love him even when he stayed up too late reviewing contracts. Blake promised to never let work come before the woman who made him feel human again. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," Blake didn't wait. He pulled her in like the world was ending and beginning all at once. The applause exploded, but all Amber could hear was the sound of her own heart finally quiet. At the reception, Amber danced with Eleanor under twinkling string lights, the older woman's hands fragile but proud. "You're not just marrying him," Eleanor whispered. "You've rebuilt something in all of us." Later, Amber's mom clinked her fork against a champagne flute and stood to speak. "My daughter used to stay up past midnight melting sugar over a stove too old to trust. She believed love was a luxury poor girls couldn't afford. Today she taught me love is courage, and sometimes courage wears lace." Just as Blake was about to give a toast, Marcus stood. The room quieted. "I'll be honest," he began. "I didn't believe in her. I thought she'd break us, but instead she bent us gently and made us better." He raised his glass. "To Amber, who didn't just marry into this family. She reminded us what it's supposed to mean." The crowd erupted in cheers. Amber blinked fast, holding Blake's hand tighter under the table. She had fought to be here, and now no one could take it from her. Weeks passed. They returned to New York, not to penthouses or limos, but to a brownstone near the park where Amber opened a tiny bakery called Jars of Joy. Blake funded it quietly, never speaking of it as an investment, only as faith. Every morning, Amber watched the sun rise through the bakery window while rolling dough and singing old jazz. Every afternoon, Blake stopped by in a suit and loosened tie, stealing a pastry and a kiss before heading back to his world. Somehow, they made it work. 2 rhythms, 1 beat. One evening, as Blake locked up the shop while Amber counted receipts, she felt a strange flutter low in her stomach. Not nerves, not hunger, something else. "I think I might be pregnant," she said aloud, half to herself. Blake turned so fast, he knocked over a tray of lemon tarts. "What?" He gasped, eyes wide. She laughed. "I said might. We're not celebrating yet unless you want to clean whipped cream off your shoes." But he crossed the room in 3 steps and kissed her like she'd just handed him the moon. The test came a week later. 2 lines. Blake cried. Amber laughed through her tears. They curled up on the bakery floor between shelves of peanut brittle and jars of lavender caramels and planned a future that didn't include jet-setting or press releases, just lullabies and Sunday mornings. They didn't care about nursery colors or baby names yet. All they cared about was this: they had defied the odds. Not because they were lucky, but because they chose each other again and again, even when the world told them not to. Years from now, people would ask their daughter how her parents met. She'd tell them a story about candy and disguises about a girl who never thought she was enough. and a man who had everything except peace. She'd say they fell in love the way all great stories do, accidentally, imperfectly, and with their whole hearts. And somewhere in the back of a bakery in Manhattan, two people would still be kissing between batches of toffee because happily ever after isn't the end. It's the choice you make every day. Autumn crept into New York like a quiet promise, painting the trees outside Amber's bakery in shades of fire and cinnamon. The bell above the door jingled each morning like a song only they heard, and Blake, ever the early riser, now made it his ritual to unlock the shop while she prepped dough with flour on her nose and music in her heart. They lived in the upstairs apartment, small and warm, where the ceiling creaked when it rained and the window let in the scent of sugar and streetlights. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Business was steady, but Amber didn't measure success by numbers. She measured it in smiles, like the boy who came in every Wednesday for a peanut butter blossom and left with a joke, or the elderly man who wrote poems on napkins in exchange for lemon bars. Her world was smaller now, but fuller, deeper. And Blake. He'd quietly scaled back his corporate duties, handing more to his team, appearing in fewer meetings, but somehow accomplishing more because his heart was finally home. With her. With their quiet, messy, real life. One crisp Friday morning, Amber stood at the window, cradling a warm mug of tea, watching leaves spin in the wind. Blake came up behind her, slid his arms around her waist, and kissed the back of her neck. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked. "You mean after cinnamon rolls and scones?" she teased. He shook his head. "I mean after this chapter. Do you want more?" Amber turned to face him, eyes soft. "More what?" He rested his forehead against hers. "More life. A bigger family. Maybe a sibling for Jellybean." She smiled at the nickname they'd given their daughter before she was even born. Jellybean, for how small and sweet she looked on that first ultrasound. Now she was 3, a whirlwind of crayons and questions, with Blake's eyes and Amber's laugh. "I've been thinking about it," Amber admitted. "But I don't know if I'm ready to split my heart again. What if I never love another one the way I love her?" Blake kissed her gently. "Then we'll just grow your heart, like you did mine." That night, after Jellybean was asleep and the city lights blinked beyond the window, they curled into each other on the old couch that still smelled faintly of vanilla and paint. Amber traced lazy circles on Blake's palm. "You ever regret it?" she asked. Leaving it all behind, Blake looked at her like she'd just asked if he regretted breathing. "Are you kidding?" he said. "I used to fall asleep wondering how much I was worth. Now I fall asleep next to what I can't even measure." She blinked back the tears. "You're getting good at this romance thing. I had a great teacher," he whispered. As weeks passed, the idea of more grew quietly between them, like a seed planted in early spring waiting to bloom. They didn't rush it. They didn't chart it out on spreadsheets or ovulation calendars. They just kept loving each other, fully, fiercely. And then one Sunday afternoon, as they were dancing in the kitchen to an old Sam Cooke record, Blake spinning Amber in flour-dusted socks, she paused, a strange flutter in her chest. "I think," she said, breath-catching, "I think we did it again." Blake's eyes widened. "You mean—" She nodded. "There's another Jellybean in the oven." The second pregnancy was different, calmer. They'd already been through the storms, and this time they were walking into it hand in hand. Amber still worked at the bakery, though she let Emily take the early shifts, and Blake read bedtime stories to Jellybean in voices that made her laugh so hard she snorted. They chose to keep the baby's gender a surprise, preferring the mystery, the quiet wonder. And on the night before the due date, as the city slept beneath a snowy sky, Amber whispered to Blake, "I'm not afraid this time." "I am," he said, "but only in the best way." The birth was long, exhausting. But when the baby cried for the first time, loud and fierce like a trumpet call to a new life, Amber sobbed into Blake's shoulder. "A boy," the nurse announced. "Strong lungs." Blake laughed, kissing Amber's forehead over and over. "You did it. You brought him here." She held the tiny bundle close, cheeks damp with joy. "We did it. They named him Jude after a song, a prayer, a hope, and from that moment, the world changed again. Not bigger, just deeper." The weeks that followed were a blur of bottles, lullabies, and late-night rocking chairs. Amber was tired, sore, amazed. Blake turned into a swaddling master and baby burp ninja. Jellybean adjusted with a mix of curiosity and chaos, determined to help, but often causing more flour spills than she fixed. Still, the house was full of noise, of crumbs of love. And one night, as they lay in bed, both kids finally asleep, Amber turned to Blake and said, "Remember when you tried to scare me off with a blind date and a passion fruit salmon?" He laughed. "I was doomed the moment you walked in wearing those terrible glasses." She smirked. "You loved them. I loved you." And just like that, their story wasn't about wealth or disguise or even the odds they'd beaten. It was about choices, small ones, brave ones, the ones made when no one's watching. Amber and Blake had built something not even they could have scripted, a life rooted in imperfection, blooming in joy. Because real love, they'd learned, isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it comes wrapped in a candy jar. Sometimes it's born in the hush of a hospital room. But always it's worth everything. 10 years later, the bakery still stood on the same street corner in Greenwich Village, though now it had 2 stories, a garden out back, and a tiny sign above the door that read, "Jars of Joy, where stories are sweeter than sugar." Amber stood behind the counter one rainy Tuesday, her apron dusted in cinnamon, watching her daughter, now a tall, whip-smart 13-year-old, teach her little brother how to swirl caramel without burning it. The scent of toffee filled the room. Outside, a line of regulars waited with umbrellas. Inside, the walls were lined not just with candy, but with handwritten notes from customers. "You saved my marriage. I met my best friend here. Your raspberry truffle reminded me I deserved a second chance." Amber had once dreamed of escaping her reality. Now she had built a new one with love, with sugar, with something no amount of money could fake. Blake, ever the early riser, arrived like clockwork at 3:45 p.m. every day, still in a suit, though the tie was looser now and the lines around his eyes deeper from years of smiling. He kissed her like he always had, casually, like it was just breathing. "How's the batch?" he asked, peeking into the cooling tray. "Sweeter than usual," she said, winking. Jude added 2 extra spoonfuls of chaos. What no one knew not yet was that earlier that week, Amber had been invited to speak at a conference. Not a food expo, not a small business panel. No, this was different. The Women's Impact Forum of North America had named her one of the top 10 social entrepreneurs of the decade. For bringing community into capitalism, the letter had read. For proving kindness scales. Amber hadn't told anyone yet. She wasn't sure how. She didn't feel like a CEO. She still spilled cocoa on her blouse and cried at baking competitions. But that night, while putting away the last chairs, she saw Jude asleep in the reading nook, crayon in hand. And beside him, a drawing. A child's scrawl of her standing behind a candy counter wearing a crown. And under it, in wobbly letters, "My mom is a queen. She saves people with sugar." Amber sat beside him, holding the paper like it was scripture. She didn't need trophies. She had this. Still, something in her stirred. She remembered who she used to be, and she owed that girl something. The following week, she walked onto a stage in Chicago in front of hundreds of women executives, students, single moms, dreamers, and shared her story. She didn't glam it up. She told them about the hospital bills, the disguises, the blind date that changed everything. She spoke about how love had taught her business, how pain had taught her empathy, and how sugar had taught her patience. "You don't have to come from wealth to create value," she said, voice steady. "You don't need a title to build legacy. All you need is to choose every day to show up. For your people, for your purpose, for yourself." The applause was thunderous, but it was the quiet moments afterward, women hugging her, whispering thank you, that stayed with her. One girl pressed a note into her hand. "You reminded me I matter, that I can start small and still dream big." Amber wept in the hotel room that night, not because she felt proud, but because she had finally forgiven herself for the years she thought she wasn't enough. Back in New York, the bakery was busier than ever, but Amber made a new rule every week. 1 jar of candy would be free to someone who needed hope more than sugar. No questions asked. People started calling it the kindness jar. Some left tips in it, some left poems. One day, someone left a ring with a note, "I was going to end my engagement. Then I had your coconut ball." It made me believe in sweetness again. Amber kept the ring in her office drawer, a quiet reminder that healing could be soft, and small, and still profound. On their 15th anniversary, Blake took her back to the cafe where it all began. Same creaky floors, same scent of cinnamon and black coffee. They sat in the same booth. "Still think raccoons would beat ducks in a street fight?" he asked. Amber grinned. "Ducks have leveled up, but I'm still betting on the underdog." They held hands like teenagers. They ordered pie. And when the bill came, Blake looked at her and said, "If I had to do it all over again, every mask, every misunderstanding, I'd still choose the park. I'd still choose you." Amber kissed him. "And I'd still wear those ridiculous shoes." Years later, when their kids were grown and the bakery had spread into 3 more neighborhoods, Amber wrote a book. Not a business manual, a storybook. Jars of Joy, a love letter to the ones who didn't fit in. It was filled with recipes and memories and the quiet ache of hope. In the dedication she wrote, to the ones who were told they were too messy, too poor, too strange. "You're not too much. You are more than enough." The book became a surprise bestseller, not because it was polished, but because it was real. And now, dear reader, yes, you, the one who made it to this last line, Amber has a question for you. What's your jar of joy? Is it music words, science, raising a child, healing a wound? Whatever it is, hold it close, guard it, feed it, because the world will try to convince you that only the loudest dreams matter. But Amber, she built a life, whisper by whisper, sugar by sugar, truth by truth. And maybe, just maybe, you can too.